Dr. Jorge Alvarez Romano. Or Jorge, if you'd be able to share your screen, please. Jorge is
Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Great.
I'll just give you a brief introduction while you share your screen. So Jorge is a Senior Research Fellow at the ARC Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies, James Cook University in Australia. His research aims to advance systematic conservation planning theory and practice through promoting and improving the integration of terrestrial, freshwater and marine conservation planning initiatives. His research explores theoretical and methodological aspects of decision-making problems associated with an integrated land-sea planning approach. Thank you, Jorge.
Thank you very much, Steph. Obviously, IMBeR can co-organizers for inviting me to be part of this wonderful workshop. I'm really excited to be part of it, and we're looking forward also to listen to some of the other presentations. I also hope everyone is keeping well and healthy. I mean, this is quite strange and difficult times. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the contributors of this, which is a long-term transdisciplinary project, which was led by COBI, which is a Mexican NGO, and obviously, which also had participation of a big number of conservation scientists and managers from Mexico, the US, Australia, and the UK. So if people want to know a little bit more about that, the technical aspects of this project are described in this paper in Global Change Biology, which I would be more than happy to share through a link today if people are interested. The project integrates ecological connectivity, the effects of global warming, and socioeconomic considerations. And so to start with, so why ecological connectivity? Sorry, I guess I'll decline this annotation request, right? Yeah.
Could you say that again?
So I just got a request for annotation, so I'll just ignore it, right?
Yes, please just go ahead and give your presentation.
Yep, okay. So why ecological connectivity? So the literature is very clear. It shows that maintaining the movement of organisms within conservation areas across entire seascapes is quite critical to maintaining the populations in the long term, and to buffer also from the effects of disturbances such as, for example, overfishing, bleaching, cyclones, oil spills, and all the things. Further, it is well established that the way we design marine reserves is quite important, not only because it is not only to ensure the viability of marine populations within the marine reserve system, but also to replenish fish areas, sustaining the livelihoods of coastal communities across the world. So it is well established also that the way we design the way we design it from a technical point of view is important, and it has been advancing very rapidly. However, there are still few practical applications, and there is a need to develop and to test some of these approaches in what I call real world applications, like this case. So, what about global warming? So as we know, ecological systems are rapidly changing due to warming oceans, which means that the design of marine conservation systems also need to be adjusted accordingly to these changes. For example, the disturbance processes like coral reef bleaching or changes in the distribution of species and existence are major things that are rapidly changing the way our existence are functioning. And one particular concern are the potential changes in connectivity due to ocean warming, which may, in this case, warrant rethinking how we design conservation areas to account for these modifications. So for these reasons, it is well recognized that marine spatial planning processes or exercises, including the identification, for example, like in this case, of areas that we may want to protect, for example, using marine reserves, must take into account the noted changes. So So what we did, so our project was undertaken in the mid-reef islands region, so the Gulf of California. This is an area that has been widely recognized as a high priority for marine conservation, not only in Mexico, but also globally. It is an area that is quite important for fishing because it sustains the livelihoods of several fishing communities all along, both in the eastern and the western shores of the Gulf, as shown in this image. And the region, which was quite fortunate for us, is also has been extensively studied for many, many years. And in particular, there is really good knowledge about the oceanography and the ecological connectivity for several key species in the region. So this was an ideal case study where there's a need to do applied planning and where the information was ideal to undertake this exercise. So the project then aimed to complement existing MPAs and conservation initiatives in the region. And I mean this, and I say this is very important because we know MPAs and marine reserves are not the only solution in the suite of tools and things that we can do for marine conservation. So in this case, we focus on the design of a network of marine reserves that can achieve 4 objectives. The first one noted here is representation. So we wanted to represent all the key habitats and species associated with rocky reefs, which in this case are key ecosystems in the region that sustain high levels of marine biodiversity and that are also species of conservation and commercial value and concern. Second, we wanted to maximize connectivity within the marine reserve system to ensure that the long-term persistence of these species was ensured. And we focused on larval dispersal because it was considered a key process, and we had good, as I said, we had good information about it. Third, we wanted to ensure that larval connectivity was maintained under possible future warming conditions. And finally, and very importantly, we wanted to ensure that the socioeconomic impacts associated with the implementation of the network were minimized, so we could maximize compliance and eventually the long-term effectiveness of the network. So, so what we did is we set representation objectives for the work consistent with the rarity and the level of threat of different species and ecosystems, and we used the most up-to-date databases for species in the region, and we use this information to create species distribution models for more than 200 species of fish and invertebrates, like the one shown here. We also created updated maps to represent the occurrence of marine ecosystems in the region, including rocky reefs areas, mangrove, seagrass, sargassum, and other areas. And we identified also things like spawning aggregation areas that were targeted as well. In terms of socioeconomic considerations, we set representation of, we incorporated this aspect mainly through the estimation of the opportunity cost of implementing such a network in terms of the potential economic losses for artisanal and industrial fisheries in the region, which is the main use in that area of the Gulf. So our model incorporated information about catch probability, biomass, and market value of commercial fish and invertebrates that are fished by these fleets. And we use a parameterized bioeconomic model that is called Atlantis. It's used in other places around the world too. And this one incorporates environmental and economic information to essentially estimate the parameters that we needed for this opportunity cost model to essentially estimate how much fishers would lose in different areas of the region if these areas were close to fishing. To incorporate functional connectivity, which is what we focus on in terms of connectivity, we use information about the dispersal patterns of 3 focal species, which in this case are representative of species of commercial and conservation importance in the region. So these species have different larval dispersal patterns due to their biological features, such as planktonic larval duration and the timing of their spawning. And these are key parameters that were used to parameterize a biophysical dispersal model that we use to estimate the current and the future connectivity patterns under, in this case, a possible ocean warming scenario. And so what we did is we follow what we call a graph theoretical approach to incorporating connectivity, which essentially characterizes the importance of different areas, or in graph theory framework, nodes, to maintain the overall connectivity of the network. And I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. So essentially, we use a larval dispersal model to estimate the probability that larvae were transported from any region of the Gulf to any other region within this planning area. So given that increases in ocean temperatures are estimated that will reduce the planktonic larval duration of this of this species, what we did is we adjusted the value of the PLD for each focal species to estimate the potential reduction of larval dispersal, and those are potential changes in connectivity due to ocean warming, which is shown in the panels below the in the two panels below my screen. So what is this graph theoretical approach? So using the larval dispersal model that I just described, as I said, we estimated the probability that the larvae are transported across the whole region. And with this information, we estimated how important each of these units were for representing, or essentially for maintaining the connectivity across the whole system. So we identified two types of units or areas that we then use to calculate some network metrics. The first one, which we called hubs, are units that will maximize the larval flow throughout the whole network. And we, among the many metrics available, we decided to use eigenvector centrality. The second one is we identify areas that we denote as stepping stones, which are areas that represent units that if you remove them from the system, they can have significant fragmenting effects on the network because they are linking areas that otherwise would be disconnected. And in this case, we use a metric called betweenness centrality to identify these regions in the network. So both features were identified and targeted as connectivity features in the prioritization analysis, which we did to identify what we call an optimal configuration of marine reserves. In this case, we used Markson, which is the conservation planning software mentioned earlier by Michelle, and which is one of the most widely used conservation planning software so far. So to integrate information on connectivity and opportunity costs, we explore the effects of increasing the amount of protected area in the overall connectivity, which in this case is denoted by network connectedness. So what we did is we checked how much the opportunity cost of the system changed as we increase the protection levels. So in typical exercises, the amount of protection would be incidentally, the amount of connectivity will be incidentally increased as we increase the area protected. And that is shown by the area that is, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but the area, the dark line. Well, in this case, when we specifically target areas that act as hubs or stepping stones, then we can increase the connectivity without increasing the opportunity cost as much, which is what we did in this exercise. So following this approach, essentially, we designed these three versions of the network. So the first one is focusing only on representing species and habitats. This regards connectivity and climate change. The second one, or S2, adds the connectivity features given the current larval dispersal patterns. And the third one incorporates also connectivity, but uses the reduced connectivity patterns by reducing the PLD due to the expected ocean temperature increase in the region. So while the three reserves incur very similar opportunity costs, which was one of our key criteria, and they seem fairly similar just by looking at them, there are notable differences. For example, there is slightly larger and slightly closer, both S2 and S3. However, the connectivity patterns are quite different, as we can see in this panel slide. So in terms of connectivity, what these figures are telling us is that the links between the marine reserves, in this case of larval dispersal for one of our key species, both types of targeting with or without climate change, result in networks that are more dense, and we expect that the flow of larvae between the reserves is higher. So in this case, the blue dots or the nodes represent the different marine reserves in the system, and you can see very clearly that the patterns of S2 and S3, both under the current and the warmer ocean scenarios, are higher. So to finalize, our results show that while the proposed approach can help planners to design better connected marine reserves, even in conditions where future climate scenarios predict reduction in PLD, for example, in this case, and larval dispersal. However, there are several aspects that can be improved. The first one is that we didn't consider the effects of temperature and acidification on larval development, behavior, or survival. It can be quite important. There's obviously many more species that we could model, including winter spawners, which spawn at slightly different times of the year, and for the same reasons are subject to slightly different currents in the Gulf. We also didn't include changes in the ocean currents because we didn't have the information at the time, but we were working on something like this. We can obviously improve the dispersal model in many ways, and one of them is incorporating explicitly aspects of demography and the dispersal of adults, not only larvae. And we expect that there would be some shifts in the distribution and abundance of some species and habitats, which obviously will modify also the connectivity patterns. So just to wrap up, some key lessons out of this work is that ongoing adaptive implementation of the networks is quite critical. So in this case, as I said, we were working mainly on designing marine reserves, but including all the type of other effective conservation measures will be quite critical to the implementation of this network. The strong leadership of COVID, the local organization that was heading this process, was quite critical, and that was based on long-term networks with fishers and NGOs and government agencies in the region. There were also a lot of capacity building activities like teaching local researchers and managers to use GIS and planning tools and optimization tools like Maxan, which is a long-term goal of the project. And finally and foremost, that we think that the early and long-term participation of stakeholders, in this case, for example, fishers that participated in the monitoring of the fish and invertebrates that we used to target in the region in this exercise, were quite critical for the uptake and for the future of the network. With that, thank you very much. And if you have any questions, yeah, just drop them on the chat, and I'll try to address them. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. That was wonderful. We will take any questions in the chat, and we'll come back to that during the Q&A session.